Today is the awakening ceremony for the village children's job classes, and people had incredibly high hopes for Arel since his mom was a high-class sword princess and his dad was an archmage, so he is bound to get something good. However, when it's his turn to be touched by the priest, instead of seeing visions of his job title, all he sees is the color white. The priest is stunned because this almost never happens, but in cases like this, it could only mean one thing. The priest announces that just like a disappointed college graduate in the job market, Arel is going to be chronically unemployed. Classes are blessings bestowed on an individual that allow you to specialize in a job and acquire skills to improve yourself, so it's a really big deal. His parents and sisters spent all morning glazing the hell out of Arel because they thought you would receive a legendary class, so imagine how shocked they were to hear that he is due to be jobless. But regardless, they do still love their boy, so they start canceling their retirement plans and tell Arel that he can just mooch off of them and live in their basement for the rest of his life if he wants. However, Arel says he has no interest in becoming a basement dweller. Everyone seems to think he's going to become a bum since he's classless, but he honestly doesn't think it's a big deal. Sure, it would have been nice to have gotten a cool job that would make him strong immediately, but he has still been learning how to use a sword with his mom for years at this point, and the fact that she hasn't accidentally killed him with her overwhelming force yet must mean he has been getting better, so he's not discouraged. Even if it's going to take more work than usual to achieve the same results as others, he's willing to keep trying until he becomes just as strong as his parents. Arel's family members are all happy to see that he hasn't lost hope yet, so they start glazing him, saying he will definitely become famous in the future. And Arel appreciates it, but he really needs to get back to training, so he heads out into the fields by himself. There he hears the sound of swords clashing nearby, so he goes to check it out and spots two children from the village in the middle of a duel to test out their new sword classes. Soon enough, one of the boys notices Arel watching them from the corner over there, and they ask him what he's doing here since this isn't a place for a classless loser like him. Arel says there are no rules against him coming here to train, so he'd just like to practice in peace, but the kids seem really intent on establishing dominance over Arel, so they say they'll be nice and show him what a sword class wielder can do. The two of them begin sparring with one another again in front of Arel. He is kind of impressed. Don't get me wrong, their technique is laughable at best, but Arel does think it's intriguing how effective sword skills really are. The first skill anyone with a sword class receives is called basic swordsmanship, and it allows you to swing a sword decently well even if you've never held one in your life, which is clearly the case for these two. He thinks he might actually be able to get some good practice if he goes up against them, so he interrupts and says he'd like to have a duel with them. The kids are offended by the fact that Arel thinks he would stand a chance against them even though he's classless, so they'd agree to the match, but just to make sure, the first kid asks Arel if he has his divine protection. A divine protection is a blessing that everyone in this world is born with, and it basically creates a shield around your body to absorb damage up to a certain extent. Arel informs them that he does have a divine protection, and the boys are relieved to hear that since it means they don't have to worry about accidentally killing Arel during their duel. The first one steps up and charges at Arel, fully expecting to overwhelm him with his initial strike, but to his surprise, Arel is actually holding his ground really well. No matter what he does, he can't find a single weakness in Arel's technique to exploit. He signals for his friend to come over so they can jump Arel, but he sees it coming and jumps out of the way in time. Mostly because the second kid was yelling during his sneak attack. The swordsman class may have given them decent sword skills, but it can't do anything about plain old stupidity, so these two wouldn't be able to come up with a decent attack plan even if their lives depended on it. Either way, he thinks this is a great opportunity to challenge himself by fighting two opponents at once, so he charges towards them, but within seconds he has already knocked them out, and it wasn't as hard as he thought it would be. Any reasonable person would have admitted defeat here, but the boys say they haven't lost yet because, nah, that one didn't count. Just then, a red-haired child shows up, and he tells the two of them to stop whining because on a real battlefield, there are no second chances. Red hair seems to be pretty well known since the boy don't bother arguing with him, and as he walks up to Arel, he tells him that his skill with a sword is remarkable for a classless bum like him. But the only reason he won that match was because he was up against those weaklings, so now Red Hair wants to fight Arel to prove that he is superior. The boys inform Arel that Red Hair is the son of Captain Evans, the village's head guard, and Arel happens to know Evans since he used to show up at their house every so often to ask Arel's mom to help him hunt demons. But to be honest, Red Hair looks nothing like Evans, so Arel briefly considers calling him adopted, but he doesn't want to make him any angrier than he already is. Redhead is only doing this because he thinks his father is the greatest, but everyone else in the village says Arel's mom is stronger, which is true by the way, but Redhead can't accept that. He wants to make it clear that he isn't lazy like those two over there. He awakened his sword skills a year ago and has never skipped a single day of training, so even though he is young, he has already attained some intermediate-level sword skills. He believes the skills of parents are inherited by their children, so he is here to prove once and for all that his dad is the best by beating Arel. But Arel calls him out on his BS, because none of what he said made any sense. He's obviously just angry that Arel's mom can beat up his dad, and he's trying to take it out on him, but Arel is always down for a good challenge, so he accepts the duel. The duel begins shortly after, and the two start clashing blades with incredible speed. The other two boys watch on from the sidelines, and they are astonished by the fact that Arel is able to keep up with an intermediate swordsman like Redhead. After fighting for a few minutes, Arel can tell that Redhead is a lot stronger than the other two, but his anger is clouding his judgment, so after one wide swing, Redhead is left completely open, and he plans to take full advantage of that. He closes the distance and aims for Redhead's neck, but at the last second, Redhead uses one of his skills to counter. Arel manages to block the initial strike, but the second slash hits him in the gut and sends him flying into a brick wall. Redhead is surprised that Arel actually managed to block one of the slashes at such close range, but he still got hit in the end, so it's Redhead's victory. Arel asks for an explanation, so Redhead tells him that what he just used was called Twin Blade, and it is an attack skill that allows him to perform 2 strikes in one swing. He admits that Arel is way better than he thought he would be, and he respects him for it, but there's no way someone who is classless like him would ever be able to defend against a sword skill like that. However, Arel takes that as a personal challenge and swears he will find a way to overcome it. A few days later, Arel's sister comes into his room to wake him up, but he really isn't much of a morning person, so he just ignores her and goes back to sleep. However, Astaire then threatens to kiss him if he doesn't wake up, and that's enough to get him out of bed. They both head to the kitchen to grab some breakfast, and Astaire is still trying to kiss Arel, but his mom doesn't seem to mind since it's not incest if you're not blood related. However, in this case, those two really are blood related, so this is definitely incest. Once everyone has had their meal, Astaire asks Arel if he plans to go to his special training session again today, and he confirms it, but she doesn't understand why he has been pushing himself so hard lately. She tells him he should take a break every once in a while, but Arel doesn't plan on resting until he has become the best, so once he's done with breakfast, he heads out to continue his training. Astaire is starting to get really worried about him since he's been coming home late every day since he got beaten up at the training grounds, but Fara is sure that Arel is capable of taking care of himself, so there's no need for them to worry. She takes Astaire out back and shows her a chest full of broken swords. These are all the blades that Arel has been using to train, and you can tell by how worn out they all are that Arel is putting a lot of effort into getting stronger, so they should let him work as hard as he wants to. Meanwhile, out in the forest, Arel is using a tree to test out his new move since he thinks he has finally perfected it. He had to let the redhead hit him with it a lot so he could figure out how it works, but he eventually got it down, so he can use Twin Blade Slash at will now. All this while, a goblin has been watching Arel from the bushes, and even though it just saw what Arel is capable of, it uses the logic of my ranked teammates and decides to attack him alone. Arel spots the goblin and easily slashes it across the chest before its body could even hit the ground. Just then, Arel hears the growl of a large monster somewhere else in the forest, and it sounds pretty big, so he's about to retreat to call for backup. But just as he is about to leave, he hears the voice of a kid being attacked by the monster. He doesn't have time to call for help anymore since it might be too late to save the kid by the time he returns, so instead he charges forward to handle it himself. He eventually arrives at the spot where he heard the screaming, and he finds Redhead pinned up against a tree by a hobgoblin. He is severely injured, so Arel needs to save him, but he can't rush in carelessly since the hobgoblin is still a major threat. He patiently waits while the monster closes in on Redhead, and just as it's about to finish him off, Arel sees an opening, so he hits it with a twin-bladed slash, killing it instantly. Redhead is still badly injured, so Arel shares some of his standard issue holy water with him so he can recover. He feels a lot better now and thanks Arel for sharing his holy water, but now that that's out of the way, he demands to know how the hell Arel managed to do that. Twin and Slash is a complex move that can only be achieved by using a skill. Arel admits that it definitely is complex, but all he needed to do was figure out the patterns and timing, and he was able to replicate it pretty easily. In fact, he should probably be thanking Redhead since it's only because he kept using it over and over that Arel was able to figure out how to perform the technique. Redhead can't believe it, but even if Arel was able to replicate the technique without a skill, he is still certain that his skill-based attack must be stronger, so he asks Arel to have another sparring match with him right here. The two face off against each other, and just as expected, Arel is able to match Redhead's twin slash. But not only that, he even goes a step further and throws in a third slash which catches Redhead off guard and knocked him off his feet. It's called twin and slash for a reason, so it should be possible for him to launch 3 slashes at the same time. But since Arel isn't using a skill to perform the slashes, so there's no real limit on how many he can perform. Redhead is floored at the realization that Arel is simply better than him, and Arel walks away confident that he has asserted his dominance. A few days later, Arel is having dinner with his family, and Fara mentions that Evans' child has decided to go to Brescia, the city of swords, to train for some reason. Arel realizes he's probably the reason the redhead suddenly decided to leave town for training, but the city of swords sounds pretty interesting, so he is considering heading there as well. A few years later, Arel eventually decides to jump on a carriage headed for Brescia. And in that same carriage, he meets a man and a woman headed there as well. The man is a barbarian and the woman is a dual sword wielder, so she asks the man to team up with her, but he immediately declines since he hates working with people who fight with flashy clothes on. The woman gets offended and tells the man that her class is focused on speed and evasion, so there's no reason for her to bother getting any heavy armor. Plus, this dress comes in handy since most of her opponents would be too busy staring at her opai to fight properly. The two are about to launch into a full-blown argument over this, but all of a sudden, the driver interrupts to tell them they both have amazing advanced classes, and he'd really appreciate it if they could put those classes to use right now, because they are in a bit of trouble. The two look forward and realize that the path is being blocked by a horde of orcs, and there's no way to get around them. The barbarian immediately starts freaking out because it'd take an entire party to handle a horde this large, and he knows damn well that he doesn't have what it takes to solo them, so he pushes past the helpless mother and son in the carriage and hightails it out of there. The dual wielder also runs off since she has no intention of risking her life for others, so it looks like everyone else in the cart is doomed. Or at least that would have been the case if Arel weren't here. He runs out to confront the horde and begins cutting them down one after another. The driver is impressed because he can tell that Arel just used the blink step skill, and it is an incredibly versatile skill, but it's practically useless if the user gets surrounded, so he wonders what Arel plans to do in this situation. As the orcs close in on him, he begins spinning around as he executes quick and efficient slashes, and the driver can't believe what he's seeing because Arel is clearly using the sword dance skill, but that's a skill exclusive to the sword princess class, and that class can only be obtained by women. Shortly thereafter, Arel stabs the orc king in the head, putting an end to the battle, and all the others are incredibly thankful for his hard work. Once he returns, the kid in the back asks Arel what class he has because his skills are amazing, but everyone is shocked to find out that he doesn't have one. 5 years ago, after Arel first learned how to use the twin blade skill, his mother had trouble believing what she saw at first. She had completely convinced herself that Arel was doomed to be a bum for the rest of his life because he was classless, but he explains that he is able to naturally learn skills through practice and hard work. On that note, he asked her if she'd be willing to show him some of her sword princess skills, so if he could try learning those, and after that, he'd like to head to Brescia to train for a while. However, his mother wasn't really paying attention to most of what he said because she was so overjoyed by the fact that her son isn't going to be a loser after all, so she ran inside to tell the others. Back to the present, the carriage has just arrived at the gates of Brescia, so the driver wakes Arel up and tells him they've arrived at his destination. There are a lot of swordsmen here, as well as many other advanced classes, so Arel could probably learn a lot here. But before he leaves, he asks the driver if he has an advanced class as well. He tries to avoid the question by reiterating that he's just a driver, but a regular driver wouldn't have been able to accurately identify Arel's sword skills so easily, so there's clearly something special about him. The driver eventually admits that he actually possesses the Holy Knight class, but he occasionally works as a driver to take a break from all the fighting that comes with his job. He can tell that this is Arel's first time in a big city, so he advises him to go join one of the guilds as soon as he can. Most of the swordsmen here live off winnings from the battle tournament, and you can't join the tournament without a guild. Although he warns Arel to be careful about which guild he joins because there can be some nasty ones out there. After the driver leaves, Arel heads into the city to find a guild to join, and a bunch of them seem to be recruiting, but he wants to make sure he picks the best one. All of a sudden, a blonde girl sneaks up behind Arel, and she attempts to bump into him so she has an excuse to start a conversation. But Arel's too good for that, so she ends up face-planting into the concrete. She can't believe he actually managed to avoid her without even looking, but that just means he must be really talented, so she gets up and says she has an offer for him. Basically, she asks Arel to join her guild and pulls out an enrollment contract for him to sign, but he immediately tells her he's not interested. Sure, he wants to join a guild, but if she's using desperate tactics like this, then her guild must suck big time. Arel was completely right about the girl's guild, but she still wants him to join, so she offers to go on a date with him if he agrees to join, but Arel tells her she's just as flat as his sister, so he has no interest in going out on a date with her. He then gets ready to leave, but before he does, he asks her if she can point him in the direction of a guild that's actually good. The girl can't believe Arel is really asking her for directions after calling her guild trash, but she's a nice person, so she tells him the best guild around here is the Black Blade Guild, and their building is over there. Arel follows her directions and eventually finds the Black Blade Guild office, but there's a long line up front of people who want to join, so he's going to have to wait a while. Once it's his turn, the clerk tells him that he will need to register for an aptitude test to join, and to take the test, he needs to have an advanced class. However, when Arel tells him that he is classless, the clerk practically bursts out in laughter and tells his bum to get out of line because he's never going to be allowed to take the test as a classless loser. Arel asks him if he could make an exception just this once since he's sure he'd be able to pass the test if they let him take it, but the clerk tells him rules are rules, so Arel is forced to leave. He then proceeds to attempt to apply to every guild in the city, and unfortunately, the advanced skill of lying to the recruiter doesn't work here since as soon as they checked his card and found out he was classless, they all rejected him. It's clear that no guild is going to accept Arel at this rate, but then he recalls that his mom wrote him a recommendation letter before he left. She told him that if he took it to reform her guild, then they'd definitely let him join, so Arel decides to start searching for the place. Just then, Lilia comes up to him again and asks if he's willing to join her guild now, but Arel still has no interest in working with her. She begs him to reconsider since her guild is on the verge of being disbanded since they don't have enough members, but Arel says that's not his problem. Lilia is getting really desperate here, so she gets down on the ground and starts begging Arel to just join. She even offers to lick the dirt off his boots if he agrees to it. But by the time she looks up, Arel is already gone, and the crowd of people nearby is laughing at her pitiful display. Arel has been walking for a while now, and he should be close to his mom's old guild by now, but he's not sure which building it is. Just then, Lily shows up again and asks Arel to at least come visit her guild since it's really close by. In fact, she can see it from here, so she points over at the building, and Arel is surprised because it actually looks pretty nice. He asks why Lilia is so desperate to get new members if the guild is so well established, and essentially, Lilia's guild used to be famous, but a lot of stuff happened, and now it's a shell of its former glory. In fact, they are pretty much the weakest out of all the guilds right now, but she assures Arel that the Dragon Fang Guild will rise to the top again. Arel is shocked to find out that Lilia's guild is called Dragon Fang, because that's also the name of his mom's former guild, so this is a huge coincidence. He is no longer opposed to listening to Lilia's proposal, so he follows her inside and she leads him to the waiting room so they can discuss things. However, her dad happens to be in here, and he's an absolute mess right now. He notices that Lilia brought another newbie to sign up, but he tells Arel that he shouldn't waste his time here because this guild is done for. He then walks out before Lilia has a chance to say anything to him, so she explains to Arel that her dad used to be one of the top 2 swordsmen in Brescia, but he hasn't been the same since the day he lost his arm. She is sure that seeing the guild leader in such a pitiful state must have made Arel lose faith in the Dragon Fang Guild, but to her surprise, Arel says he'd still like to join. She asks him if he's sure he really wants to join them, but it's not like any other guild would accept him, so this is his only option. That's good enough for Lilia, so she pulls out the enrollment contract and gives it to Arel so he can sign. Once that's done, Arel is officially a member of the Dragon Fang Guild, but Lilia realizes that she never actually asked him what his class was, so she looks at the form Arel filled out and sees that he wrote classless down. At first, she thinks Arel must be joking, so she asks him to take this a little more seriously, but he tells her he is being dead serious and even shows her his ID as proof. Lilia goes silent after realizing that Arel really is classless, and then she proceeds to threaten to beat him up unless he rescinds his contract right now. Arel calmly asks her why, but it's common sense that no guild would want a classless nobody among their ranks. She was so happy to have finally found a new member for the guild, but if Arel really is classless, then he's going to be useless in the tournament. So what's she going to do? Just then, the guild's other member, Lena, happens to walk in and Lilia goes crying to her about how the new guy turned out to be classless, but as soon as she hears the word classless, she knows exactly who Lilia must be talking about. She asks Arel what he's doing here, but Arel says he doesn't have to explain himself to a stranger. Lena can't believe Arel doesn't remember her after all that time they spent training together in the village, but he still insists that he has never met her before because he would remember training with someone as beautiful as her. Lena gets flustered by Arel calling her beautiful, but now that he thinks about it, he does recall training with someone who had the same red hair as Lena, but that was Captain Evans' son. Lena tells Arel that Evans only ever had a daughter, and that daughter is her, so he now realizes that she really was the redhead he trained with back then. He apologizes for not recognizing her, but in his defense, she looks really different now, And as he says this, he is making direct eye contact with her oppai. She has been training here for the past 5 years to make sure she'd never lose to Arel again, and since he's here, she challenges him to a friendly match so she can show him how much she has grown. Arel is always ready for a fight, so the two head to the training center, and as the match begins, Lena launches a twin blade slash at him. Arel attempts to counter with a twin slash of his own, but as the slashes collide, Lena's attack still manages to hit him. He doesn't understand what just happened, so Lena explains that while he may be able to copy her skill, she has gotten a lot stronger thanks to her training, so her attacks are at least 5 times stronger than his. Arel is impressed by how much Lena has grown, but if strength is her main advantage, then he just needs to avoid getting hit. Lena charges in to attack again, but when she strikes at Arel, he dodges her attack so fast that it leaves an afterimage. She recognizes this as the Supreme Shadow Sword skill, and she can't believe Arel managed to learn something like that on his own, but he basically just learned how to move really fast. Now there's no way Lena can lay a finger on Arel, and soon after, he knocks her out by countering one of her attacks and redirecting the force back at her. Arel is clearly the winner of the duel, and Lena tries to act like it doesn't bother her, but she starts bawling her eyes out as soon as she leaves the room because she can't believe Arel is still stronger than her after she spent 5 years training. Arel and Lilia decided to give Lena some time to cool off, so they head back to the meeting room, and once they're there, Arel asks Lilia for a little more detail regarding the guild's situation. Long story short, she explains that their guild is in a lot of debt, and they need to win the next tournament to get enough money to pay it off, but at least 3 members are required to participate, which is why she was so desperate to get someone to join. Given the circumstances, Arel wonders why Lena chose to stick around this long, so Lilia explains that when Lena first arrived in the city, all the big guilds rejected her because they didn't want to have to train a kid, but Lilia's dad took her in spite of her age, and ever since then, she has been a loyal member of the guild. Anyway, regarding the guild's current situation, Arel doesn't think they need to worry too much since everything will be resolved as long as they win the tournament. Granted, they'll have to fight teams of 5 with a team of only 3, but he enjoys a good challenge. This was the end of episode 2. Subscribe to not miss the next part.
Take you